Okay, so let's get started with your brain. So we want to look at the brain and actually what is involved with the emotional part of the brain. So this is a side view of the brain, and you can see in the very top, the purple part to your left, it says prefrontal cortex, and then down below, and it has an arrow pointing to this little like reddish orange gland, it's called the amygdala. And so let's talk about those two parts of the brain, because those are going to be really important for us. So here we are at the brain. Now, the two words that we learned, the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, you can put those on your page right now on number 1 and number 2. And then the corresponding boxes below it, let's talk about the two. So the first thing that we want to talk about is the amygdala. And so that's actually number 2 on your box, but we're going to kind of develop that a little bit more right now. And so what do you think that the amygdala is responsible for? Well, it's responsible for our emotions. And so I'd like for you to list some of the emotions that you think that the amygdala is responsible for. Okay, and we don't have to have an exhaustive list, just some of the things that are kind of like uppermost in your mind, because maybe you're thinking, oh, I actually identify with these quite a bit. So let's look at them. So we have anger, depression, fear, sadness, joy, love. You can have anxiety, and here's another one, peace. And so it has a lot of control in terms of how we feel. And so I want you to think about some of the emotions that you tend to feel quite often. And so, and list those, make sure that those are there. And so you're aware of that you got this little gland, this little part of the brain that's actually responsible for those emotions, okay? And so how old are you when you get an amygdala? So does it develop at a certain time in your life or what? Well, we're actually born with it. And so we know that we're born with it because babies use it to communicate. And so what does a baby do when it's hungry? It cries. What does a baby do when it's mad? It cries. What does a baby do when it wants something? It cries. And so babies can show all these emotions, and oftentimes babies use that as their primary method and mode for communication. And of course, little children do as well when they're throwing temper tantrums. That's how they're communicating. I'm upset and I'm very frustrated. Okay, and so we can see that where the amygdala is actually placed in the brain. Okay, the next thing we want to talk about is the prefrontal cortex. Now, do you know what the prefrontal cortex is responsible for? It's responsible for judgment, logic, and long-range planning. And that's really important. But is everybody born with one? Yes, of course. Okay, so why is it that people lack judgment then? Why is it that somebody would prefer to use their emotions over their judgment? You've seen, we've talked about it before, how we've met people in their 30s or 40s and maybe in 50s, and they act like they're 12 years old, or they act younger than 12. And we think to ourselves, how did this person get this old? And actually, how come they're still here? Because they have such poor judgment. They just go with the wind, live for the moment, they never plan, and they're very emotional. So how does that happen? Well, let me just explain something to you. How old do you have to be in the United States to rent a car? Well, you have to be 25 years old, and there's a reason for that. Because it takes about roughly up to 25 years is when the prefrontal cortex actually fully develops. Now it's there, but it's kind of like the light bulb doesn't switch on. So it's like roughly between 23 and 25 years for girls, because they develop faster than boys. They'll have suddenly like a switch goes on and it powers up. And that's why you see a lot of people in their mid-20s going, I don't know why I just graduated with this degree, because I'm not really thinking I'm going to use this degree. And so because they have a huge sudden shift in their brain, and they're seeing things very differently at 25 than they did when they were 17. Now, I'm going to say something that probably some people are going to think is a bit controversial. And so because I understand this brain physiology and the development of our children, I've never been one to encourage my daughter to ever marry young, because I know that she's going to go through some significant changes in her life biologically. And so when she was 13 years old, you know, she said, "Hey, Mom," she said, you know, when I grow up, I want to, you know, get a master's degree. She wanted to be an FBI agent. And she said, "I really would like to do something like that," because she's always been really naturally gifted in investigations. And so I said, "Okay, that sounds like a really good idea." And she goes, "But I also want a beautiful wedding." Well, you know, my daughter, and of course all moms think this, but I think that my daughter's really pretty and she's really smart. And so I thought, you know, I know she's going to get a lot of offers for weddings. And I know matters of the heart, and I know how the amygdala operates. It says, "Oh, I just can't live without this person, so I think I want to get married and prematurely." So realizing that the marshmallow test is taking place. Okay, so this is what's happening in my household. So I say to my daughter, I say to Chelsea, you know, "Are you serious about this? Do you want me to help you get your master's degree before you get married?" Because that's what she communicated. "I want to get it before I'm married." And so I said, "Okay, well, let's have a pledge with one another. Let's do the pinky promise. I'll do my part and you can do your part. So you work hard in school, get your undergrad, and then when you get your master's degree, and you get married, I'll give you the wedding of your dreams." And so she said, "Deal." So life starts to happen. And of course, she had boyfriends, and every single boyfriend she had asked her to marry her. And so it was easy when it was early, but then as she started to age, and you know, she was beyond 18 at this point, and so I, you know, got a phone call, and I said, "You know, I think that's awesome, you know, that you would love to marry my daughter, and she really cares about you. We think you're a great guy. We really like you a lot. But I should tell you that I actually have an agreement with her, and the agreement is," and of course I replayed the agreement to him. And so they didn't propose. And so Chelsea was, you know, really getting frustrated at that point, because she was like, "Yeah, I'm ready to get married. I'm ready to get married." And so, and I said, "Get married, Chelsea. You know, I'll release you from your end of the promise that you promised me. And you asked my involvement to come into an agreement. We made a pinky promise that if you waited until after your master's degree, so you had all your education out of the way, and you had a much better view of your life, then I would pay for the wedding. Otherwise, if you still want to get married, I'll come to the wedding and I'll celebrate with you, but I'm not going to pay for it." And so she got really frustrated. Well, they broke up. Okay. And then she came to me later and said, "Mom, I'm so glad you said what you said and you kept your promise, because it would have been a disaster if I'd have married that guy." And so she continues to age by this point. She goes through college, and then she's like, "I don't know if I want a master's degree." And so she's dating somebody who wants to marry her again. And so I said, "Wow." And so I explained the same story to this other guy. And of course, he didn't ask her to marry her then. And she was frustrated and angry. And but then she got accepted into a real prestigious university overseas in England. And so she went on and got her master's degree, and they broke up. And so she came home and she said, "Mom, I cannot tell you how grateful I am that you have kept your promise to me, because I got to tell you what, all those guys that wanted to marry me and I wanted to marry them, I have to tell you honestly, it would have been a disaster." And so now she's at a point where she's now past 25 years old, and I know she's going to make a really well-informed decision when she gets married. And she's really happy with herself, and she's a very different person at 25 than she was when she was 20, and even 22 or 23 years old. And so I want you to understand, the whole point of this is I wasn't controlling Chelsea. We came into an agreement. I wasn't controlling Chelsea. Because she was free to get married if she wanted to. I was buying her time, because I knew that roughly around 25 or so years old, she was going to see life really differently than she did when she was 20 or 21 or 17. And so I wanted to buy her enough time to where her brain would develop, it would switch on, and then she could see life differently, and then choose the husband that she would want to be with, and realize that she's choosing him not because she's not fully developed, but after she's fully developed. And it would be a much better thing for her, especially in today's society when there's so much divorce going on, and divorce is a terrible, painful thing. I don't recommend it for anybody, but when it happens, you know, out of necessity in some cases, I got to tell you what, it's a painful thing, and it affects everybody. And so you don't want that for your kids. You don't, and B, you don't want your kids to be unhappy the rest of their life. And if they make a commitment to be married and they suddenly realize it was a mistake, that's also a real traumatic experience for them too. And so it really diminishes quality of life. And so this is why I did this, is because I understood the physiology of the brain. And so she's thrilled with it. She's happy. She has no regret over that agreement that we made. And I have no regret either over the agreement that we made. And so about 25 years old is when that actually takes place. So having said that, remember the timeline. Remember it said my life story, and it's the timeline. And we asked you to do this so that you could see the relationship between unhealthy relationships and healthy relationships. So above the timeline, you put positive experiences with your age and with the people you're with, and then below was negative experiences with your age and the people you were with. And so my bet is most people actually experience the worst part of decisions that they've made. So they'll look at their timeline and say, gosh, most of the stuff that's below the line that was a negative experience happened before the age of 25. Isn't that fascinating? And so it shows us, wow, you know what? Biology was playing a huge role in what was happening in my life at that point. And it also shows you the extent of healthy relationships. And so if you didn't have a strong family that helped you to get through some of these more difficult times, see, if Chelsea had gotten married earlier, she probably would have ended up in a divorce, according to her, but at least with one or more of these guys. And that would have been a box underneath the line before 25 years old. But thankfully, she had a healthy family that understood what was happening to her in her biology and were helping her through those hurdles until she could get to a point where she could do it on her own. And so the problem is with our young people, just because they develop quickly and we think that they look like an adult, that they should behave, and we expect them to respond like an adult. And that's just impossible because they don't have the brain power. They literally do not have the brain power. You know, when Chelsea had her first boyfriend, she was 17 years old, and this little boy came over, this young kid named Anthony, and he sat down on the couch, and they were going to go eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches at the park. So that was pretty innocent. And so Anthony sat down, and I said, well, hi, Anthony. It is so nice to meet you. And my daughter was over in the kitchen, and she was giving me all the silent signals. No, Mom, don't say anything. Just don't say anything. Don't say anything. And I said, so tell me, Anthony, what are you going to do today? And he explained it, and I said, that sounds fun. And I said, Anthony, do you know what a prefrontal cortex is? And he just like went pale, and he goes, no, I don't. And I go, that's right, because you don't have one. I am your prefrontal cortex. And so and so my daughter was dying through that. And so but see, that's a really good example of how we give our young people a lot of excessive freedom, and we're expecting them to react or behave like an adult that's seasoned in maybe the same experience or situation that they're in. And when they fail, we let them have it about how they failed and how they blew it. And some parents go as far as to saying you're a loser, you just can't get it, you're not smart, you're never going to get it. And really what the issue is not that they can't get it, it's just that they can't get it fully because they're not fully developed in their brain. And so keep that in mind as you are thinking about what happened to you before the age of 25, and think about that with your own children, if you have them, about what's going on in their brain and why we have to be realistic with them and why we have to be helpers to them to help them get through some of these difficult things. Now, what happens to the brain, and that's a normal brain development, by the way, 25 years old. So what happens to the brain if you have trauma or if you have substance abuse or if you have any of these problems, could it delay the development of the prefrontal cortex? Absolutely. And so that's why, you know, some people struggle with, you know, they might be trying to get life going for them. Maybe they had a significant trauma when they were younger, or maybe they had a lot of substance abuse when they were younger. And even though they're cleaned up, they're like, I'm just trying to get my act together and I'm really struggling with it. Well, the good news is, even if they've had a delay in the development of the prefrontal cortex because of trauma or because of substance abuse, when you deal with the trauma and the substance abuse, it will actually allow your brain to pick up where it left off, because we have brain plasticity. And so the brain actually grows again. And so it can fully switch on again. It just might take a little bit longer. And that's okay, as long as it switches on. That's what we want to have happen. And so, you know, that's another reason why we need to practice the 5-10 principle, because the 5-10 principle will help to heal that brain more rapidly, because you're introducing the chemicals into the brain that it needs in order to heal. And so these are just absolutely wonderful pieces of information to know about our brain and how we make decisions. Now, the amygdala, what happens with because it kicks out some of the chemicals that feel really good. Okay, so we have dopamine, which is a pleasure hormone. We have serotonin, it makes us happy. We have adrenaline, which is the flight or fight, that comes from your amygdala. And then we have the noradrenaline or norepinephrine, which is a chemical that works with it. And so these are wonderful chemicals that we need, but they're specifically for a reason. They're not designed to make decisions. And that's where people go wrong. What they do is they take that little tiny prefrontal or amygdala, that little tiny part of the brain, and they put it in front of the prefrontal cortex. And so it's like this little Napoleon that's saying, hey, I'm in charge and I feel bad today, so I'm going to make all the decisions. And so it ends up doing all the decision work up here in front of the brain. And it actually exhausts the amygdala. And the amygdala overworks, and it's constantly producing these hormones, constantly producing these chemicals into the body. And then over a period of time, the body breaks down and you end up with autoimmune diseases. Unhealthy relationships are obvious, no purpose, because you've got this, you know, hypervigilant amygdala that has promoted itself to a different position in your brain, and it's doing a job it should not be doing. And then that amygdala gets exhausted. And of course, it creates all kinds of problems. And then you have regret, and then you have bad experiences, and then you have more trauma that is likely self-induced, because you're using a part of your brain to make decisions that it wasn't designed to make. Now, once you look at this picture, and so where is the amygdala positioned in terms of the brain? It's behind what? The prefrontal cortex. And so I love this about biology, because it even shows us that the amygdala is to be protected by the prefrontal cortex. And so when you think about it, wow, my prefrontal cortex, which is designed for logic and long-range planning, it watches and evaluates consequences, and it's about good judgment. It's actually designed to protect your emotions. Now, isn't that an awesome idea? Because if you are the person that really struggles with having your feelings hurt and feeling, you know, kicked into the teeth and feel victimized, and you try to make the right decision, but it just doesn't seem to happen. And so you're that person that is always really feeling like nobody understands me. It's likely because you are using your amygdala to make decisions for you and to try to work through problems logically, but it wasn't designed to do that. The amygdala is designed to give you experiences of pleasure and maybe sadness and some of these other emotions that we need, but your prefrontal cortex is actually designed to make your decisions, to work out problems, to be logical, to systematically manage issues as they come first here before it filters it to the amygdala. And so this could be an indicator to you that you're that person that's actually using your emotions for decision making, and that's a really bad idea on any level. And so let's look at this, because there are certain types of emotions that we make, or pardon me, decisions that we make emotionally. And so are you the sort of person who uses your emotions to make decisions? We've been talking about that right now. And so the truth is, though, we use some things as crutches, and we say, this is why I made a decision emotionally. Okay, this is how we do it. And so instead of identifying it accurately and saying, hey, I'm just reacting, we're using emotions to make decisions, and this is how we say it. Well, it's my health, I don't feel good, so I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and whether you like it or not. Okay, well, that may be a good idea or a bad idea. I can tell you it's a bad idea. It could be our circumstances. Maybe we're saying our circumstances are going to force me to make emotional decisions. Maybe there's money problems, maybe there's relationship problems, maybe there's housing problems, maybe there's a job problem. It could be any other thing, but outside of your own body. But you could say, that's the reason why I'm making the decisions I'm making, because of my environment. Well, I'm going to say that's a crutch, because your environment isn't holding a gun to your head saying you better say yes. And so, do you see what I'm saying? So we use these things as crutches. You could be the person that uses your faith as a crutch to make decisions emotionally. You may be telling people, well, I feel like God is telling me to do this, or God is telling me to say this. And then when things calm down, you might have a little bit of remorse, and you'll say, well, God changed his mind, and what really God, and you try to blame it on God. And so, or you might have the personality that says, hey, I just say what I feel, whether you like it or not. And so all these are excuses not to take personal responsibility for the decisions that you're making. And so what I want to show you, and have shown you, is that it's likely that you have good intentions, that you're not intentionally out there to sabotage the world, but you're using your amygdala, the part of your brain that's designed to be the icing on the cake. This says, oh, we've had a great day. It's been a wonderful time today. Or feeling remorse or sad when you need to grieve. That amygdala needs to be there to help you grieve. But if you're using it to make decisions and then blaming other situations externally on why you're using the amygdala to blame or to make decisions, I'm going to say it's the wrong use of the amygdala. You need to use your prefrontal cortex. And so this has actually been very exciting. I hope you find it as exciting as I do, and I hope you learn something from this. And so we're going to continue in the next session about studying the brain.